So if you have 3 in a row, then you're off. This is Sherry Wong, Assistant City Attorney. May I do the public swearing in now? Anyone who's going to speak to the board tonight, please stand up and raise your right hand so you can be sworn in. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Please answer. Thank you. Because of the fact that it doesn't fit within the character of the historic district, it's much larger than what's typically permitted or what is warranted within this type of district. When looking at the properties and the overall character of the area and the architectural feel.
Is the applicant present?
Mr. Chair, this is Shari.
Hi.
Hi. Can we do the disclosures, please?
Sorry
Thank you.
about
Thank you.
that. Does anybody on the board have disclosures for this project? Starting from
Richard, could you speak
Yes,
to the mic?
I spoke with the applicant briefly on the phone last week. I went by it, I know.
No dis-
No
Nothing to-
disclosure.
Nothing to disclose.
Um,
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good to see you guys again. So this is the updated graph. As we discussed, I went back, was able to make changes that kind of give you I guess the issue before was I could see where it was more boxy top, and you guys were thinking that I was changing the facade, but in reality, it wasn't changing the facade, it was just the way the graphic was done. So I took it upon myself to do it and get it more realistic looking, as you can see, from the top picture to the right picture.
Which rendering shows the shape of the building this today?
The new one. Yes. See, the old one had the squares on the
Right,
top,
right.
so I went ahead and tried to make it as close as realistic as possible. And the other thing with this one is the new one is it's less of a graphic of an image of a person, or of colors of paint. So it's a lot less of a super graphic than it is of actual just colors that we're trying to go for. And I mean, if you guys have any questions regarding about this one, I hope it's better than the one before. You know, we said that it was too the white and black lines were too much that we had before.
Thank you. Actually, is there anyone from the public who wishes to speak on this subject? That a yes? Okay, sorry. All right, if no public comment, then we'll,
I'll just make a quick comment. I think this looked even better than the first version that came forth. I love it. Cool. Like something that needs to be exactly where it's located. It'll give a good revitalization, I think, to a building that's thirsty for it. So great.
Dave?
Well, I think there's an improvement. Of course, I'm an older generation and maybe don't get shouted at as well. I mean, I like that you preserve the architecture of the building.
I agree, especially with Richard. Last month, he had mentioned that the area has lots of this in it, and going by the letter of the law, so to speak, stretching. However, don't see it as an intrusion. No, there's no change in the structure of the building. It's paint. And I personally live with the whole thing and do think it's an improvement. I mean, it would not be my choice, but I think it's fine, period.
I agree with everyone else here on the board. The design is much improved than last month. Less obnoxious is the word there, but the design looks good. You did a good improvement to it. I have no problem approving it.
Well, my comment is I guess I'm the outlier in this decision here. I have to agree with staff that I do think the visual impact not the dark. I'm not questioning the paint, but I just I don't respond to the super. That is not broke.
First, we have to have a motion, so it would be either a motion to approve or motion to deny. Okay,
Yes.
no problem.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Could you please read the language down here on the 4th page of the staff report?
Motion to approve the resolution for a certificate of appropriate operations under case number UDP-HG 21014, located at 210 Southwest 2nd Street, based upon the following findings of fact, and is subject to the following conditions.
So is it based on the findings of fact in the staff report? And is it also including the condition that's on page 4 of the staff report that states this application is subject to the approval by building, zoning, and all ULDR requirements?
That I have no idea. I just want to get these guys, let them down their way.
Okay, but would you like to approve the condition though? That basically that it has to comply with the other code requirements, the ULDR
Would that,
and building and zoning?
would that give this guy what he wants?
Yes, because you approved it.
I'll do exactly what you said.
All right. And then you need a second to approve. Who second? Was it?
We have a roll call.
Carney,
Yes.
Mr. Parker?
Yes.
Rosa?
Yes.
No.
You all next.
Thank you.
And just to clarify, I'm gonna do the resolution after the meeting. I am going to say that it does meet the criteria as opposed to what the staff report says that it doesn't. Okay.
Our next item, item number 2, is UDP HP 21022, 728 Southwest 4th Place.
Okay, good afternoon. This application is for the replacement of an existing flat tile roof for a new metal roof on this property located in the Sailboat Bend Historic District. It is a contributing property within the district. And originally, when looking at the building permit record, this house did have, was a built-up roof. So it was a flat kind of asphalt roof on the property. And at some point, the flat tile roof was put on, and now the applicant is requesting the metal roof. So you can see in the staff report some of the history of the permitting and the original design of the roof itself. Typically within historic preservation, the preferred method is to go back to the original style of a roof covering or stay with what's existing. So in that sense, this request does not meet the criteria. Within the Sailboat Bend Historic District Material and Design Guidelines within the ordinance, the metal roof is an option that is listed. So for that, it does.
Tricia, could you repeat that? It's listed as an option for
A material within the Sailboat Bend Historic District. In the Material and Design Guidelines, we have the ordinance within our code and which lists options for types of materials that could be used. A metal roof is an option that's listed. However, when looking at our criteria within the main section of our code for historic preservation, the preferred method is to replace in kind. So you're replacing either what's existing or you're replacing to match what the historic records show.
I seem to remember past case where that
the board has approved cases like this in the past. However, each application is its own. So the board has to review the application for what it's requesting and for the particular. So with that, I'll read the conclusion, the summary. In accordance with sections 472411 B3CI and 472411 B3CII of the ULDR, staff finds that the application for a COA for major alterations under case number UDP-HP 21022 located at 728 Southwest 4th Place does not meet the criteria as outlined in section 472411 3CI of the ULDR and partially meets the criteria in the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation and meets the criteria for consideration of materials as listed under 47177B of the ULDR. And the following condition is provided for your consideration, which is this application is subject to the approval of building, zoning, and all ULDR requirements.
Could we please do disclosures?
Do we have any disclosures for this?
Nothing to disclose.
Nothing to disclose.
No. The applicant present? Do you have something to add to the presentation?
My name is Tim Zaboya. I'm the owner of the property. We just, in our house, well, number one, I was not in agreement with the categorization of farming.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
And I'll take my math.
Yeah.
Yeah, number one, I wasn't in agreement with that our house was a conforming house in the architectural report. I'm on record at saying that. And for the visual impact of our house to the road, we have a fence, we have trees that you cannot see, and the existing roof is very old, and the metal roof, like the staff member mentioned, is approved through in Sailboat Bend, and that's why we chose it, just for security of our house, because we're having problems right with our roof and leaking and things, and we have to get it replaced. So we chose to go this option, which is the better option for us.
Step up to the microphone, please.
I'd also like to mention to the board is as far as the materials that are listed, it is the most sustainable substrate homeowner could go with.
Could you please state your name, sir?
My name is Louis Gingona with ASP.
Okay.
Just a question, what is the life?
Depending on whether it's galvalume or aluminum, and in this case it is aluminum roof, it's 50 plus. Could be 6, 7. How close to bracket or salt. Also, for the record, not change anything structural.
You're just
Replacing.
recladding the roof.
Correct.
Those public.
Sounds like they have a plan, and the thing that makes it easy for me is that Sailboat Bend approves this style of roof. I happen to be putting a roof on my house now, and it's extremely expensive. He's doing a good thing by picking that roof because his homeowner's insurance is kinder to him. So I think it's a win-win for everybody, and it's approved by Sailboat Bend, even though it doesn't comply with the historic preservation's basic program. It works, so I'm in favor of it.
Jim, are you putting on a metal roof?
No, I'm putting on a barrel tile roof, one at a time. They're very slow with their delivery.
No comment other than the roof looks good.
I think it's a wise decision in this area here. I mean, for goodness sake, you want something to last as long as possible.
So David, I have a question. How do you feel about the fact that it doesn't mimic this?
Well, this property, look at it, really front, not really a long street. The front is got a lot of landscape. I don't think crack neighbor.
I just have one question, Tricia. If this would have been the roof that would have appropriately met what you were reading as a roof replacement design, we wouldn't be here on the issue, right? You would have just approved it at staff level.
That's correct.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have to get into it now, but it almost seems like I love the design of it. I think metal roof works very well in sailboat bend. I think it works well anywhere. But I think moving forward, it's an approved material, but it didn't work in this case, so they had to come here and obviously had to play what they were going to do otherwise with building. I think it works, and I think we need to work on potentially streamline this type of stuff moving forward, so we can really just allow people to proceed, move forward, improve their home, get on with it. We're having this conversation, could easily be an impending hurricane right now, and we avoided it, but I think we need to really visit how we move that along a little quicker.
One of the further
We have had a proposal for update sailboat bend historic district ordinance, but
Just-
we updated the survey and with a resolution for identification of contributing and non-contributing structures, but the ordinance itself has been updated with updated language. The Sailboat Bend Civic Association had asked to have time to review it. We did do it together, and so staff is in the process of incorporating some of their comments into an updated draft, but it's not ready yet to go
we
forward.
will see it at some.
Yeah, but when you're talking about replacement of materials that don't match the original design, or it doesn't work with the style of the historic architecture, it does go against historic preservation principles. And we are doing historic preservation. So that has to be kept in mind for anything that's proposed by staff, that it will take a look at what the national standards are for historic preservation and staying in line with those. So that's
No, totally, Trisha. I think you absolutely did made the right call in the report. I guess it's more a matter of streamlining moving forward so that, okay, it's not in kind, but if we have an enumerated material that's used, maybe there's some more deference you can be provided than the feel in this case. Like, for example, this roof line isn't even visible from the right of way. So, find that criteria that allows you to do your job, which the report was great. But in this case, I think just streamlining this to avoid even being here on it tonight would be, I think, good for the public generally. So,
We have a motion.
Make a motion to approve. Chuck, why did I?
Just read the last paragraph.
Page 3 of the staff.
Now I gotta find. Sorry. You have it?
Board act.
Okey doke. I'm making a motion to approve resolution for certificate of appropriate alterations on case D HPP 21022, located at 728 Southwest 4th Place, the replacement of existing flat tile roof with new metal roof based on the following findings. Fact outlined in the staff memorandum, and it's subject to the following conditions, which our attorney will state, and I'll agree with.
This application is subject to the approval by building, zoning, and all ULTR requirements. And you're finding that the criteria that is listed in the staff report, it meets that criteria. That is 4717.7B and 472411D3B of the ULTR.
Correct. Thank
Is there a second?
just one correction to the item number, the case number that Tim said. It's actually UDP-H21022 instead of UDP-HB21022, which is written in the staff.
you. Okay.
You read it.
Thank you.
Just to make the correction for the record.
Motion, we have a second. Roll.
Mr. Carney,
Yes.
Parker.
Yes.
Mr. Rosa. Vaughn.
Yes.
Vice Chair Parker.
I will
Congratulations.
provide the resolution to the chair after the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you and good luck. Our next item is 103, located at 39.
Good afternoon. This applicant came before the Historic Preservation Board a couple of months ago proposing two-family residence, same location. At that time, they did request the demolition of the structure on that site. The board did approve that application, but did deny the request for the new construction of the duplex. So the applicant is here with an updated proposal that addresses some of the comments that were made by the board and were in the previous staff report. So it still is a two-family residence that they are proposing. The previous application was a little bit different in design, but for the most part, the setbacks and everything stayed the same. Along the street, go ahead. Did you have a
Summarize briefly what the difference?
that wasn't part of this application
Oh.
because the original request was denied. So this one is a completely new application. So I didn't do a comparison. Yeah, but the other design did have a parapet and flat roof. It had more of an Art Deco design to it. I'm not sure if you recall. Yeah. But so a lot of the setback, the main form of the structure remains the same as previously proposed. Along the same street, most of the residences are 1 story in height, so this would be taller than the immediate surroundings. But going through the criteria, some of the criteria is met, some of the criteria is partially met, some of it is not. So I'll highlight what is partially met, what is not met at all. So one of the criteria within 47-2411 D3CI, which is our general criteria for historic preservation, item B, the relationship between such work and other structures on the landmark site or other property within the historic district. Staff found that this partially met, primarily due to the overall massing of the structure and its context and relationship to the building immediately surrounding the property. And then within our criteria for new construction, item B, the relationship of the width of the building to the height of the front elevation shall be visually compatible to buildings and places to which it is visually related. Again, it's the same reason why staff found that this does not meet the criteria as far as its immediate context, immediate relationship structures that it would surround. And then the next one that it partially meets is the appurtenances of a building such as walls, wrought iron fences, evergreen landscape masses, and building facades shall, if necessary, form cohesive walls of enclosures along a street to ensure visual compatibility of the building to the buildings and places to which it is visually related. Part of this is related to the trees on the site. There wasn't a lot of specific information about what's happened to the on the front. So just that paid attention to forward. And then the next item, letter I, the size of a building, the mass of a building in relation to open spaces. The windows, door openings, porches, balconies shall be visually compatible with the buildings and places to which it is visually related. So it's a reoccurring theme as far as this site's immediate context, how this proposed new construction project would fit within that location. When you have all 1 story structures and putting in a much larger structure in between. And then a building shall be visually compatible with the building's place to which it is visually related in its directional character, whether this be vertical character, horizontal character, or non-directional character. Staff found that most of the structures within the street have a non-directional character, while this one would, of course, have more of a vertical. as far as the materials are concerned, the materials that are proposed as part of the new construction project do meet the material and design guidelines within the Sailboat Bend ordinance specifically. The only thing that is stuck out was the fence material that was shown in the rendering. It wasn't specified on the site plan, so staff did call that out specifically within the conditions, but that's not part of this approval because we don't have enough information about that to say it does or does not, and the specific location. So with that, I will read the summary conclusion. In accordance with the ULDR, staff finds that the application for a COA for new construction under case number UDP-H2103 located at 319- through 321 Southwest 12th Avenue, number 1 through 2, partially meets the criteria as outlined in section 47-2411 I of the ULDR and partially meets the criteria as outlined in section 47-2411 II of the ULDR. The following conditions are proposed for your consideration. 1, all glass shall be clear with an option of low E. 2, fencing is not shown on the site plan and is not included in this approval. And 3, this application is subject to the approval by building, zoning, and all ULDR requirements, including land.
I have a quick question, Tricia. In the Sailboat Bend district, in the new construction project is being proposed, they only use
Single hung.
single hung. Can they only use single hung, or are they allowed to use sliders?
So on the front elevation, within the material and design guidelines, typically says not have slider. But there's casement windows,
You can use case.
awning windows.
Just
Yeah. Yeah, sure.
Could we
see-
please do disclosures?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Disclosures. Let's start with Richard.
Yes, when I look at this here, the last couple of years, there,
Disclosures?
This is just disclosure.
Sorry.
Did you have any disclosure? You were there.
Goodbye.
Okay. Save that question.
Site visit? That's what it is? The disclosure? I didn't hear. Is it a site visit?
Site visit?
Okay, thank you.
I have no disclosure.
Nothing to disclose.
I have nothing to disclose.
And now we can, is the applicant ready?
Good evening, Steve Brandt. I'm the architect for the project. Can you hear me? I can't hear you.
Yeah.
We've designed this to basically be of the Florida vernacular style, which is appropriate for the neighborhood. You see, we've used materials, siding, and stucco as a metal roof. Massing has been designed to step back away from the street and also step back on the side to create a visually attractive massing and not just keep it all straight on the street. We've also provided a covered patio in the front, which gives it a sense of place and a feeling of neighborhood. The only comments I want to address, I guess, is the issue. Any two-story buildings problem, because it's the majority of one-story buildings. Should be noted, though, behind the building is a three-story, large complex three-story. So it would seem that would be part of the content. So if you look at the picture site, what you see is actually the building behind it that looked like the second story on this. Is actually the three-story behind. So look at if you want to talk about massing, and look between those two pictures, they look pretty much the same. Although, so the only other comment I have is on the trees. There's 3 large trees in the front of the lot now. The one on the left is dead. That will be removed. So that's why it's shown very light on the
And
plan.
the other 2 will
The
remain?
other 2 will remain. and we didn't apply for the fence. The fence is going to be, we're looking for a horizontal slot, gray fence. We're kind of waiting for you to start to approve plastic because we think that a horizontal slot plastic is most appropriate. If that's what it'll put.
Horizontal slot fit in the sailboat dentist.
The horizontal design is okay. It's just that the PP plastic material is.
That's not part of the
Just check.
answer. But
Is there any? Please. State your name and
Robert, you door.
Is the mic on? I don't
a
think
little
it-
closer to
Oh,
the
I
mic.
apologize. Can you hear me now? Yes. Okay. We're the owners, Robert Esposito and Rico Eastman of 327 Southwest 12th Avenue, just next door to this house. So if you're standing facing this property,
You're in a one-story.
yes, we're in 1 story. We're right to the left on the corner. So we have a few different concerns. First concern is the original property was just left to rot, and now it's going to be demolished. So, that was, not a great contribution to the neighborhood by a negligent landlord. And that dead tree has been there for years and a hazard, never removed. Some of our concerns, Enrico, but one, size of the house, 2 stories, is it going to be, so awkward, so it's going to be looking in our property from the second story? And then Rico's going to another question.
Well, as Robert was stating, some of our concerns have 1-story property, and based on the design saw, we're going to have windows directly above our backyard, which is going to invade our property. We feel
You're talking about the windows on the side.
on this side of the yes, correct. It is also a concern what type of greenery they're going to have along this side of the property. We have planted greenery all along our backyard to create some kind of privacy. But by having a 2-story directly behind us, and we feel that as aesthetically for privacy, good. We support development and we support changes within the neighborhood, but we're also concerned about the aesthetic of the model that we see. We are also concerned about the demo process. How is this be affecting directly, since we're right door, dust, noise control, hours. All the parking will be for construction. I myself run a construction company, so I know how things are. People want to start early to knock off early, especially with bad weather. So all of these are concerns that I don't know if they are being addressed or not. Again, we are in favor of knocking it down and putting something that is beautified neighborhood, but unfortunately, we are right next.
Well,
unfortunately or fortunately, the board has already approved the demolition. So
yes.
that's the only thing for us. So your major concern is privacy issue for the windows on the side of the 2-story property looking into your.
And the process of demolition. Oh.
Well, again, we as a board won't have control over. I think that would be more the city and building.
Correct. The criteria before the board, privacy is not one of the criteria. As far as a demolition is concerned, that was already approved.
Right.
So that would be a building department issue at this moment in time. So the criteria is before you in the staff report. That's not included.
Also, I wonder are they going to be required to provide a landscape landscaping drawing, what greens are they going to utilize, especially on their side faces or house?
Tricia, that's a good, very good
You
question.
indicated that you did not have that information.
Yeah, for Historic Preservation Board, it's not required for the size of property for that information to be provided. However, this falls into the neighborhood design review criteria section of our code, and there are landscape requirements for that. So they will have to provide landscaping as part of their building permit application, which will be reviewed by one of our landscape reviewers.
Board today.
It's not the Historic Preservation Board's determination to make, correct, but it is outlined in the suggested condition that, you know, that it is supported by the fact that it needs to meet all of the ULDR requirements, even though it's not explicitly shown in the Historic Preservation Board application. And that does include land. And you're familiar, Richard, with
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, I'll go down the hypothetical in the
Thank
event
you.
we did have the landscaping question. I'm just curious, guys, before you, Robert, what would you guys look to see or want to see? I'm just curious in the landscape realm if you had it your way. I just would want to have an idea of that.
You have to.
Could you
have
please go to
the
the mic?
I'm sorry I delayed there to have you walk back and forth.
We don't know. So we just want to be able to do, right now, when you step out of our back, all you see is the trees that are 8 tall. I mean, we're
Right.
trying to take privacy for our own sake.
Right.
Be able to screen. We're concerned that with a 2-story, or one, for what I saw, there are windows that you can see directly.
No, I follow all of that. My question is just landscaping. If we were if we don't have jurisdiction over landscaping, but I'm just curious as a general, just to go down the
Just be able to see green.
being
That's
able to
all
see
we're
green.
asking.
Okay.
We're
You're
not
looking
asking
for the green to block.
Exactly.
Thank you. I have a question before we go to board comment for the applicant. Because although landscaping may not be directly in our purview, it is, we have considered and looked at. When I look at your renderings, I'm looking at 4 renderings on one page, page DS. The side elevations, the windows there look awfully small compared to what I see on the second floor plan on A1, 2. Is that reflected correct?
I'm sure it's correct.
That the windows just look a lot smaller in the render.
Which window are you talking about?
I'm looking at page CS, the renderings, and then page A1.2, second floor.
There does seem to be one window missing.
So that would help too.
Trying to figure out which must be the
Well,
5 windows. 5 windows on the floor in the there's a little window missing. There's a little window between big windows, is a little bath. That's the one that's so.
anyway,
But those are the actual
it
size
just
of the
did-
windows.
It didn't look like it was correct.
Right. Those are the actual size of the windows.
And while you're here, in response to the question about what is your-
Landscaping, right? We'll be required to meet the requirements of the code, which does require a certain amount of shade trees, a certain amount of shrubbery, a certain amount of ground cover, and only a limited amount of
what about your neighbors?
as
keep
far
them
as it's hard to create privacy in a 2-story setting with a 5-foot setback. I mean, it's really a hard task. You would have to. I mean, the solution is to plant arecas along the side of the.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
The solution is to plant areca trees along the side of the house, and that's not a solution in my that I would want to have to live with because of the maintenance and the bug. Trying to provide privacy with landscape, I think, is really going to be achieved with 5. No matter where you put it, it's just not going to work. And that you can't make a solid hedge. Actually, I think the code requires them to be trimmed to 6 feet. So, a hedge isn't going to work. You need trees, and if you put trees, you'd have to do palm trees because there's not room for shade trees. And if you put palm trees, how many are you going to put? You'd have to put a whole line of palm trees that I
Or
don't.
you could put a thin line of those green at the ever.
Right.
Very small.
Anything's possible. I mean, we'll work to see
Or
if
bamboo or something.
those are maintenance
Anyway,
too.
Neighbors would not
too
want that.
invasive, I know.
No,
Right.
don't-
I
don't.
didn't mention that. Anyway, thank you, but we need to get on with the work. First of all, is there any public comment? There's no public comment. Close the board.
To hear from Richard, because this proposal was up before and you had said you were walked by it a lot. You're in
Yeah.
favor of it and you looked into it, and if you wouldn't mind just reiterating your
Absolutely.
general feeling on the matter.
Yeah, I own the property directly to the east of it. It's a single family house. It's 316 Southwest 12th Ave. This is 12th Ave. And everything Tricia had set out is exactly correct. And when you look at this street, it is mainly single family, but there are a couple 2-story structures. Actually, one structure very similar in massing. I want to say 2 lots to the north on the same side street, and there's a 2-story house exactly across from there. My feeling is that it's very difficult to accommodate meeting all of the criteria while being a proponent of development, because you have to go max these lots out. They're 50 feet wide. You end up at 40 feet. You end up with a 5-foot setback, and achieving a balance of sort of having a harmonious relationship between the setback, landscaping, massing, very difficult. But I will very confidently say that I know this is an improvement from what is currently there. And I completely empathize with Robert and with what Enrique came forth and said. It makes total sense. And I built a very similar property on 1010 that came before the board.
Right.
And it sits just on 2 sides of single family structures. But unfortunately, it's sort of like the price of the progress of the neighborhood in some cases. And I completely, again, empathize with the situation. But from what's there to what will be there, as long as we can really hope that the builder, and this is the architect in front of us, not the builder, will hopefully work within the rules, time-wise, cleanliness-wise, sort of keep it respectful, because it is a neighborhood at the end of the day, so you don't want the disruption. But I think this works if given the choice between what we're looking at as in a multifamily scenario. Sure, could it be single family? Yeah, but from a zoning standpoint, there's a development right here as a matter of entitlement. They're allowed to build this. So I think considering the balance of what the building is showing, as long as the responsibility of the GC could be to be mindful of the neighbors and certainly the considerations of the privacy that are there, I would think at some point that we sort of have to look at this and agree that it fits, that it meets the neighborhood, it meets what the neighborhood is looking for. I like it a lot more than the first.
Can I just make one comment? This is a new owner. They've only owned the property for a couple of years. Their intent is to develop the property, make it an income property, keep it for life, give it to their kids when they move on or when their kids are old enough, and they intend to hold it for a long time. But it is a new owner, and so they're looking
The
to
newer owner from the last when you were
same owner as last
same
time.
owner.
They bought it like 2 years ago, I believe.
Right. Thank you. You can't speak for the audience.
You close public comment, so you'd have to open it back up if you want.
All right, so we can open up public comment and you have to come up to the microphone. You don't, okay. Thank
Yes, because as far as I know,
Just state your name again, just so she
Oh,
can
I
record it.
apologize. Yes, Robert Esposito. As far as I knew, it was always the same owner. I didn't know there was no new ownership of that property, and it's been a rental all these years. And when we're talking about progress and development, again, we said earlier we're all for it, but there is the opportunity to build, just like there's a duplex on there now, there could be another 1-story duplex could be considered that could be gorgeous, rentable, and it is just a rental property. It's not being built for someone to, that for the owners to live in it. So, I mean, I think there should be the opportunity that well as one story.
That's
And if it's new ownership, then I'd be curious to know, because I've never seen it up for sale.
that's a question for the
I could be wrong, but I was told, I was under the impression that they just bought it a couple of years ago, but I just looked at the property appraiser and it doesn't look that way. They never told me they've owned it for the last 20 years. So I mean, that'd be very strange to me. I don't think they've been here.
It's not relevant to what we're discussing, but it last was recorded with the deed in 2004.
Right.
But it doesn't have a relevance
Okay.
to what we're really going at.
All right, well, let's continue with the board.
Yeah, we have seen this.
Do you want to close the public comment again?
Let's close the public comment.
Thank you.
I was just going to comment, as Richard had, that in our neighborhood, we've approved several of these very similar type of new homes. And we've looked at, somewhat privacy, somewhat fences, sometimes whether the water run neighbor stuff yellow. It's very challenging in our neighborhood to try to fit everything in, and you're really not going to find many people that will want to come in with just a single unit home. So I agree with Richard, if in that block, if it doesn't detract completely, but you have to have consideration in terms of privacy for these individuals. And I don't know how we go about doing that. I don't know. There is a solution.
Again, privacy is not the criteria before the board. I just ask that you look at the criteria in the staff
It's not-
report.
I know it's not a criteria before the board, but I think one thing that should be in consideration is that should be.
Right, but we can't require what's not in the code, so that whatever is required here in the staff report, it talks about what criteria it meets and what it doesn't meet. So the board should really discuss what the criteria is that it meets versus what it doesn't meet versus other things. So I just want to caution the board away from things that are not required in the.
I tend to agree with Richard. He said it very eloquently. That's why I asked first that what we have in front of us is better than what is there now. Perfect world, you would make everybody try to stay within the parameters of what we are supposed to be deciding on, what our board purposes, stick to the things that are put forth for us. Privacy is not one of them, although I paint. But we have an application that meets the criteria at some and does not in others, and partially in others. Generally, this thing does look like it fits the neighborhood as things are moving today. I think we go off subject just a little bit. We do talk about our recommendations that are going to be to our city father. And the economics of our challenge to maintain historic preservation is a consideration. People are not going to buy property, fix it up if it's not economically feasible for them. If this was restricted to a certain type of building or usage, would not work for someone. And because it's limited space and can't go this way, it's got to go that way. That's just the reality of the matter. So for me, I tend to agree with Richard that this is not the perfect fit, but it works. And it's better than what we have today. I'm going to vote in favor of it. But I did have one question. If they put a fence around it, are they going to have to come back before us if they don't choose wood? Or will the staff just tell them no?
So if they are meeting our guidelines, something that staff approved administratively building permit. If it's something that is beyond what our regulations state, it does have to be back.
I have nothing to add.
My comments, I just wanted to address your comment about the 1 and 2 story building. Unfortunately, since the code allows 2 stories, you would have to go back and change the code. That's not something we can really, but you can bring your concerns forward. I share your concern about privacy, and I would hope, even though it's not absolutely required in landscape, that you would seriously consider your next door neighbor's concern and try and see what would work there to give them the green to look and keep each home separate. And we don't have any way of enforcing that, so it would be your word of honor. So with that, there a motion.
Page 6 of the staff report, if you'd like to make a motion.
Would somebody like to make a motion? I can't make.
I would love to make the motion. I don't know what I just did in my staff report. I deleted it. And I can.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll read it. Dave, pass. I would make a motion to approve the resolution for certificate of appropriateness for new construction under case number UDP-HP 21023, located at 319-321 Southwest 12th Avenue, Unit 1 and 2, based on the, I don't have the staff report in front of me, but I'll reflect the findings of fact as outlined in the staff memorandum, subject to the conditions that I'll allow the city attorney to read off for us.
Okay, all glass must be clear with an option of low E. Fencing is not shown on the site plan and is not included in this. This application is subject to the approval by building, zoning, and all ULDR requirements, including landscaping. Additionally, on page 6 of the staff report, zoning reviewed this application and has some requirements that the applicant will need to meet, such, including the applicant needs to show the width of the overhangs. They cannot encroach more than a third. The setback, 5 feet side yards, equals 20 inches or a maximum of 36 inches. Provide the dimension between the front entrance doors. Show on the plans the location of the stored waste cans, if outside shown screening from the right of way and abutting properties. If waste cans are to be stored within the garage, a car needs to be depicted in the space. To show that there is sufficient room for the waste cans, show the width and length of the driveway that is within the property lines, minimum of 8 feet 8 inches in width and 18 feet in length. And these are the corrections that are required to the plans.
Just as was
That's all.
stated.
Yeah,
Correct.
thank you. You need a second?
Need a second. There a second?
Second.
Is it by Tim? So we call the roll.
Carney,
Yes.
Parker.
Yes.
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 Can I just Sure. I think what this will do will put you on charge of to watch what's going on next door, John. Because we've had too many things of people have planned something and they come back at the last minute. So, I mean, I'm just being reality. Check very closely so that things, communication, and so that what I know can't give private, but you can at least see that things are being done appropriately.
I would hope if you do something with landscaping that you would share it, communicate. We can't talk. All right, our next motion and the next applicant is UGP HP 21025, Broward County Board of County Commissioners, 100 South Andrews Avenue. Tricia, I'll let you read that.
Okay, do you want to do the disclosures or you want Tricia to go first?
We've been reading that and then
Okay,
doing.
no problem.
Okay, this application is a certificate of appropriateness for major alterations. It's for the Broward County Main Library Plaza for the repair and rehabilitation space. I do have one correction to the first page of the staff report where it does state the applicable ULDR sections. The sections should be 47-2411 3CI and section 47-2411 II. So this property is a historic landmark within the city of Fort Lauderdale. It was built in 1985 and was designated in 2013. It was designed by architect Marcel Brewer, and the plaza space was designed by Edward Terrell Stone. So this main focus is on the plaza space of this this request. Most of the work that's included in the scope that they are proposing is considered a repair. There's some replacement work, and then there are some alterations. So I'll primarily focus on the alteration. As far as the repairs and replacements are concerned, that scope of work does meet our criteria. So the alterations that are included, the first one is, if you could change the slide shown on the is concerning a paving material that is found throughout the site. It's an interlocking paver that is shown on the screen, or on the right-hand side of the screen, the top photo. It appears to be two-piece, but it's actually one-piece paving system that is kind of a design and then placed in a pattern. The applicant is requesting to change that paver to what's shown below. The image maybe doesn't do it justice, but I did go out to the site to take a look at the proposed paver, the color of the proposed paver against the existing paver. The color is similar. The actual pavers are bigger.
Similar to what?
To the existing color of these interlocking pavers that are there.
Despite the difference in the pictures.
Despite the photograph, yeah, it doesn't really work
Okay,
in this
understood.
image. So, but it was helpful to go out to the site and the comparison firsthand. And the size of the paver, it is larger. It's a two system, so it is going to be different, but it's laid out in just a regular fashion.
Do we know the size of the?
The architect probably
I'm sure
knows,
we
and
can ask
so
her.
we can ask. I don't have it right now available. The other item that's changed is primarily dealing with the pools that are located with the plaza space. So this first image is showing the fact that the pools, the one that's labeled B and the one that's labeled C, will be reduced in depth from the existing 3 feet 6 inches in depth to approximately 8 inches in depth. They also will be replacing the tile, the blue mosaic tile within the pools. The picture in the middle of the tile is what's being proposed as the replacement. The photo on the right is what's existing. There's a little bit of a difference there. We didn't have the actual physical sample there in place, so one of the conditions that I'm proposing as part of the staff report is that the physical sample can be provided to staff so that comparison can be made when the time comes. And then going to the next slide, we'll see the next item that's included in the scope of work is placement of this floating platform in the center of the pool labeled C. And that will be placed in the center of that area utilizing a terrazzo pattern that's also found on the site, but with a little bit differentiation in the color, so it is noticeable that it's not original. This is for safety concerns, but also for a usable purpose for the library space. And the applicant can go into more detail about that request. The other aspect that's included on this page, go back one slide, is there's a modification of the edge detail where the intention is to make the pools appear to be edgeless. So the coping that you see on the edge of the pool area, you can see it on the bottom picture on the left-hand side, that won't be there. The top portion will be, but the blue mosaic tile would go all the way to the top because of the reduced depth of the pool. It's just, it wasn't possible to incorporate both elements.
So there's no coping on, well, this is a question for PR.
Yeah, the coping, from what I understand, will be on the very top, but it won't fold down like it does. So we'll move on to the next slide. And this is showing the detail, which is in your packages. This is something that I've included in a proposed condition as well. Part of the reduction of pools is that the water will still flow underneath a walkway that's existing on the site. And what's incorporated in the drawing is a new weir wall, which helps the water flow over and kind of creates this edgeless appearance.
What is a weir wall?
So the architect can also explain this
well,
a little bit more.
Another
too.
question.
It's a new term for me as well, but it's sort of, it's a dam. It's a different for a dam functionality. But it's a way to stop water and allow it to flow. So the detail that was shown as part of this, and this gets a little complicated, but there's a distance between of 2 feet in between the weir wall and where the underside of the walkway is located. So in the image on the right-hand side where it says photo of pool area for weir wall location, from the edge of the left-hand side where you see the concrete going to the right, there would be a 2-foot space between that wall and the weir wall. So staff is requesting that that space be shortened, and I'm sure the architect will respond to that in his presentation as well. But that condition is present in pool labeled B and pool labeled C as well. We'll go to the next slide. And I think, okay. So then there's another existing weir wall in the design, which is flowing from pool labeled A to pool labeled B, and you can see it in the photo in the bottom, where there is kind of an edge created from the top pool to the bottom pool. And they had proposed within the plans to change that material, but staff believes that it should stay the same. So in the plans it's showing that they call it a knife edge detail, will be changed to a blue mosaic tile rather than what's existing there today, which is a polished granite. But staff is proposing to keep it the same. And then I think that might be the last slide. But that gives you an overview of kind of the overall broader changes that are proposed as part of the package, and get some detail. And for the most part, all of what's proposed does are criteria.
Tricia, I have one question.
Yeah.
Unless you have something else. You mentioned that this building was declared historic, but by my calculations, it's only 35 years old.
Right. So when properties are designated historic that aren't quite 50 years old yet, they do have to state that they are exceptional. There is that exception within our ordinance and within the national guidelines to allow for
And
properties.
who was designated? Was local or national?
It's locally designated in the city of Fort Lauderdale. And of course, I wasn't here at the time, so
Understood.
yeah, I don't know all of the details of that. So with that, I will read the summary conclusion. In accordance with sections 472411 DCI and 472411 DCII of the ULDR, staff finds that the application for a COA for major alterations under case number UD-H21025 located at 100 South Andrews Avenue meets the criteria as outlined section 472411 DCI and meets the criteria as outlined in section 472411 3CII of ULDR. The following conditions are proposed for your consideration. 1, the existing tile planters will be pressure cleaned but not painted. This is something that is specifically called out in the plan, but it was clarified with the project manager that that's not the case. Staff is suggesting that a cleaning test program be conducted on the tile surface to formulate an effective non-destructive cleaning method for removal of atmospheric oiling with the use of chemical products appropriate for this material type. And I reference a section of the National Park Service Preservation Brief number 6, dangers of abrasive cleaning to historic buildings. The second condition is concerning trees specifically. The black olive trees or a comparable small maturing canopy tree must be used rather than a cathedral oak tree, which is specified to be consistent with the original landscape design of the plaza. So this related to specifically the design of the plaza and the original intent. And 3, a physical sample of the proposed new mosaic tiles to be used to replace the existing must be provided to the historic preservation planner to verify compatibility prior to installation. For this finish, the finish of the existing polished granite waterfall edge to match the existing instead of the mosaic tile finish that's proposed. And 5, the distance of 2 feet between the weir walls and the underside of the existing walkway or concrete bench should be reduced to lessen the visual impact created by the introduction of this feature. And 6, the application is subject to the approval of building, zoning, and all ULDR requirements, including landscape.
Do you want to do the disclosures
Oh, I'm
first?
sorry.
Okay.
I always forget. Disclosure.
None.
I've been to the site.
No disclosure.
Nothing to disclose.
No disclosure.
Go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Charles Michelson, principal of Saltz Michelson Architects. Thank you for hearing this, listening to this application this evening. This is certainly a wonderful project engaged in. Part of the conversation is about making modern, historical history of Broward County. My thanks to the staff working with us on this application, putting it together in rather extensive discussion. The building itself, it's one of the last commission of Marcel Breuer, national recognized architect, with that brutalist, modern concrete glass building, which is one of the reasons it's considered a historical building, though it's not quite sold. The plaza itself was designed by EDSA in conjunction with Breuer's office. EDSA is a local landscape architectural firm with national reputation, and as a legacy project for the office, they actually worked with us some of the design and selection materials that you've seen here today. The purpose of the design was to, for one, to take care of the maintenance issues that go with any building and plaza, but number 2, to make some of the deficiencies in the design of the space and just some changes design of the plaza more usable to people who might use it today, and certainly as the downtown grow, make it more usable to the families that future. So working with EDSA, in fact, one of the landscape architects who was with them man in 1994 who actually worked on the design was involved with the project today. So you can say there is some continuity of with some of the things that you see today. So with the selection of materials, we're keeping to the integrity of what was the original design on knowledge that simply some of the materials from 35 years ago aren't available. Today we have a much larger selection of materials in its place, keeping the integrity of the design. With regard to some of the changes to the fountains that were originally designed, is they have been made shallower for purposes of safety. Certainly, if you've been around downtown for years, you know that those fountains have long periods being empty at all. And the hope at the end of this renovation is back to a situation where they will be used and enjoyed. The weirs, which are basically internal dams to the fountain, ought to create that infinity pool effect so that it's not just water lap existing, but it's kind of a very nice and elegant design issue that EDSA came up with, who manufactured to work with us with to coming up with design. I mean, out of everything that's been discussed, there are only 2 or 3 items that we'd like to have further conversation on. You know, part of those, very simply, just the selection of using black olive trees again. We obviously know what black olive is, how much they were used in the 70s and 80s, and then issues and problems with them. There are no clean black olive trees that are left. They simply don't exist. They've kind of created a hybrid of, they all went to the less denomination, 30 trees. So we do respectfully request the opportunity to take something that scale-wise is appropriate, that would be approved by EDSA, you know, along with our landscape designer, something.
And the condition does state that or a comparable small maturing.
Yes, and we want to make sure we have that choice. We certainly go back to the black distance of the weir. 2 things with that: the distance. You know, you're familiar with looking at an infinity pool. The ability to visualize it is part of aesthetic of the pool, and then number 2, the ability to take care of it, be able to get in there if work needs a little bit of distance off. If we would make the weir distance, let's say, cut it in half to a foot to the edge, that have 2 foot, from our understanding, we'd have to cut in and place access panels in there, which ultimately would become visible anyway. So
is that because of a code issue?
No, just from a practicality and work issue. If something happens in the fountains, if something gets jammed in there, the ability for somebody to maneuver in a 2-foot space is better than single foot space, 8 inches.
I'm going to interject. I have a quick question while you're talking about weirs. I'm looking at this section that we have on the screen, or we have.
Mm-hmm.
And I see the weir wall. I see the dimension from the weir wall back to, I guess, is the bench wall.
Correct.
So if I'm on the bench and I drop my cell phone, how far does it go down? Is there something to stop it, or does it go all the way to the 4-foot thick?
Yes, there's grading. There's somewhere in the
grading. Okay.
Grading that'll keep everything at the lower level, so nothing will get lost.
Period.
So again, if you think about 2-foot section grading as opposed to 8 foot, you know, it's just practical. It's easier to get to. Again, we did this in conjunction with the original designers on this to make sure that they were happy. We really do not take exception with keeping the existing granite slab that's there. The only reason that it was ultimately changed because it's literally the only piece of granite anywhere on the site. So there was, while it was part of the original design, there's nothing unique to its character. It was something that's just somebody selected at the time to use, and was saying, okay, you know, we were going to do everything with the affinity pool and the pool using the blue tile, but on that strip for historical purposes, want to keep it.
So a quick question: you mentioned that there were only 2 conditions.
Well, making sure that we could use a comparable tree and not the
Right.
black olives. Black olives, we Didn't want anybody to leave this room thinking that we were in favor or wanted to use black olives there. And the only other thing, if you consider leaving the rear wall, we'll add it. Visually, we think it was better from a maintenance point of view. Really, everything else, the polished granite, we agree if we want to keep it for historical purposes. You know, it's out of character, but it was out of character then, so we'll stay with it. And certainly we'll pressure clean everything and make sure it's cleaned up and ready to use. And of course, we'll go through all the zoning, building, and everything else. There's really only 6 items listed here. And the samples of whatever tiles we use, certainly we'll work with staff, as we always have through the process.
Rear wall. What was the rationale and
I didn't have a specific dimension proposed, but when I went out to the site, it did like a large leap between the edge of the rear wall and where the bench, the concrete. So it seemed like a large amount of space, especially for the pool that's labeled, which isn't that wide to begin with. So it's the effect of that reduction will have a change in appearance to that pool. And
right now the dimension?
2 foot. 2.
Yeah. But the overall width of that pool, maybe 5. The
Pool A, pool
pool
B.
B.
You have to speak into the mic. I'm
Just
sorry. You have
state
to
your
speak-
name.
You have to state your name and speak into the microphone. And take your mask off.
My name is Scott Willis. That area,
Sorry, what area?
the area, the pool area, where B is.
Pool B.
The length of B, for example, is
So it's 20 feet, and then the 2-foot dimension goes all the way around?
just
Or just
full 20 feet,
vertically?
right, goes
The
off.
long dimension? Thank you. Do we have any disclosure?
You did disclosures, you just need public comment now. That's okay.
Public comment? Report?
I'm relying on your history with this location. I've never been there. I wish I would have gone over there to see the size of it. But looking at it on paper, listening to Tricia, it seems like there's nothing really question. What do you think?
Put down the line here.
Okay.
I got nothing to comment.
I work at 200 South Andrews. It's nice to see an activation. It's such a cool, great center, and could be a center for what goes on in the central business district. And I think it's just gotten far gone, and it's so encouraging to see it being brought back. And I only hope that once the improvements go in, that we can keep it sort of, pristine and in the condition that you guys are doing it in. It looks great. I can't wait for it to be run through and finished. Well done.
Dave, do you have any comment?
I don't spoil in terms of that, as you well know, property next to you, built at very challenged. I've been worked with a group when all that was pretty wide open, brought all the pride to give them private building. I think you're going to do that because or put spoil in it. That's going to be a real challenge.
What is that challenge?
Well, you know what it was. We had homeless and everything like that.
That was my question, actually. I was going to pick one. I think you've done a wonderful job resuscitating, reimagining. I don't have an opinion about the distance separation, but I would tend to err on the knowing the project. But are you doing it? I mean, I know you've raised the level pool.
That's
I'm
correct.
wondering what else.
Well, part of our entire approach to this by making the site open, better lit, that'll discourage poor activity from occurring there. I mean, it is a public park. The premise of the park is to provide space. So what happens is it's difficult to speak specific social situations about creating some friction in the. However, through the design, we hope to create by not only improving that's owned by the county, but we've actually passed that and where the pieces that are owned by Lauderdale improve also, while maintaining the character of the women's building. So hopefully the use of the plaza will open to more people, more activity, and by virtue of maybe a relocation, have basic sole use of.
Maybe the library do more program.
And that is the intent to the entire premise of having water stop, using the area as a stage, possibly bringing power to different parts of the park. So if you want to put on an event, music, they certainly would create ability. So putting in that infrastructure. So the goal is to have much public friendly.
Yeah. I can't make a motion.
Tim?
Well, I can't read that thing, but I'll make the motion.
Just the last paragraph and say with the following. The last paragraph.
Yeah, that's thank you. Okay, I will make a motion to approve the resolution for certificate of appropriateness for major alterations under the care case number UDP 8P21025, located at 100 South Andrews Avenue, based on what Ms. Sherry, our attorney, will help me with.
Findings of fact in the staff report.
Based on the facts in the staff report, subject to the following conditions stated by our city attorney.
Staff conditions 1 through 6 on the page 5 of the staff report. You just probably need to discuss the applicant mentioned number 5 about the distance between the weir walls, whether or not you'd like to include that condition.
Shall we include that as a condition? You're asking me if we should?
Yeah.
What is the staff's recommendation?
Well, staff already weighed in on through the staff report by creating the condition.
Staff wanted it reduced, and then the applicant mentioned the reason why they didn't want to reduce it. So just up to you guys.
Not having been there, I'm going to rely on some advice from my chair if you had looked at it.
I looked at it a long time ago. I agree with the architect. I would rather keep avoid will.
Is there a functional issue with it, or is it strictly historical or cosmetic issue?
Well, it's an aesthetic issue with regards to the way it looks, but also a practical issue of being able to work.
Okay, so I'm going to agree with the applicant's request.
Okay, so
on
just
my
motion.
Motion.
So just to be clear for the record, it's going to include staff conditions 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6. but not going to include staff condition 5 that mentions the rear.
Yes.
The other issue mentioned by the applicant was the black olive trees, but the Arthur repeated that within that condition, it states that there is an option for another type of tree. So that's acceptable to the applicant.
Yes.
So now you just need a second.
I'll second.
Call the roll.
Carney,
Yes.
Parker.
Yes.
Rosa,
Yes.
Yes. Good luck with everything.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So we have one other item for, under communication, the good of the city of Fort Lauderdale. And at the last meeting, I had posed to the board, and the board agreed to discuss the mid-century modern landmark along Federal Highway. And as our city attorney said last time, I know you weren't here, that if you can't do one building, district of different. So I have a short presentation which hopefully put on. It's about 5.
Just to be clear for the record, 472411 allows the board to designate, motion to start the process to designate a building if you'd like, or a district.
Well, we were told the last time that the city attorney was meant for district and not a building. That's for our state.
Right. Just wanted to clarify for the
I
record.
understood, but you can go either way.
Yes, thank you.
I thought so. So I put together a small presentation because I really wanted to show the extent of how much great architecture is in our city, that I don't think many of us see it all at one time. I wanted to acquaint everybody with the actual buildings being proposed here. I will freely admit that this list is entirely my own personal choice. I've included only buildings that I believe being the highest architectural merit of the mid-century era, although there certainly may be additional buildings which may be added. However, right now I would just start. I've also taken the liberty to change the name of the proposed district. The city had been talking about calling it the South of Oakland Park, the So Oak. And in looking at the quality of the buildings in this area, I found that they really are worth what happened here. So I've, for the sake of argument, changed the name. And it's also fascinating to note that of these 12 buildings that are proposed here, these include retail, restaurant, office, theater, and religious. We've not included a residential in this grouping of designation. It's also understood that several of these buildings, we go to the next slide. Okay, I'm just showing a map with relative locations, and it's understood that some of these, several are in Oakland Park or the city of Wilton Manors, and that may be difficult for Fort Lauderdale to include, but I thought it was important to understand the architectural spirit that was built within a relatively short time frame and in a relatively small geographic. So next, the first one we start with, which is the mic. This is nobody needs an introduction to this. And it was interesting because they had the perfect architect, Charles Kirahan, because they were trying to do a cheap restaurant modeled after a very famous one in Chicago, the beach, on the beach. And McKirahan had experience during the war in the 60s. Right. And we go down Federal Highway to the corner of Oakland Park, and we certainly built, named after its original owners, Nan Burns. The structure was originally designed by Louis Wolfe, a local architect. And then it was reimagined by local architect Dan Duck. Put a lot of the space age flourished. Right. Just a few more views of it. I mean, there's so much building, it goes on and on. A lot of art. Next slide. Then we go catty corner to the Pan Am building is where, and this was in the spirit of many of the modern villages that were built in Europe in the 30s. And Charles McKirahan was one of the few, if the only one, of the mid-century modern architects. And he did several of them. One of them is right near Tim's place, that little street over there. A lot of those buildings were cut. So just a lot of, although a lot has changed, a lot has been removed, where the grills were removed. I think there's enough left here so that quite a creative square block. At the prow, calling the prow, which is the corner of Oakland Park, Federal Highway, the building formerly looked like the wonderful picture on the right side by the, for Rob Hill of the building with the red brick grill. These were slowly defaced and the building has changed. And I call this, although this building structurally is living, I call it death by a million. Looks unlike anything that it used to be like, although it's certainly short. Next slide. One other part of Times Square, which is very fascinating. All these older pictures, courtesy of before Lauderdale. The architect Charles McKirahan had his architecture studio in the square. If you see, look on the upper left, you see what the building used to look like. As you look at the upper center, you see what it looks like now, which is totally almost unrecognizable compared to the way it was. He had a very unique sense of trying sun control, and a lot of the big thing during the mid-century era was a lot of screens that controlled. It's interesting to see from the inside out, like work. So your screen, and you still get the light there, view, but you're looking over a park. So I thought it was interesting to see what it was like before. Right across the street from the Times Square Center is the Second Congregational Church of Fort Lauderdale. Very simple church, or so it looked, built with trusses construction, which is very reminiscent. Next slide. But this, on the outside, although it's simple, this is a very interesting structural system, the way it almost looks like a medieval cathedral in the way. And he had a lot of designs that may not have been built or may not have been up in terms of the metal cladding on the roof, the V-shaped design. Very creative. We don't know if it was ever done. The picture on the right shows slide. And then there's the Astro convertibles today, the Ferguson building. And what's interesting about this is there was a wonderful interview in Topic magazine a few years ago. Bernadette Castro, who was the daughter of the owner. And the one thing she said that she and her father and Chuck McKirahan had a great working relationship. And the only thing her father wanted was that Carr should see this building. That was the one thing that drove. I find it interesting that obviously you can see it was designed, but as you see, carried over to many of them as the automobile. Just south of Ferguson is Miami Carpet, two properties away. I mean, we all see it, but it's interesting because it was I've not heard of the architect, and I find it very unusual that a design would list it drawing, but they do something like that. It usually means the design consultant really and built the arc. It was a very handsome story building. And then in 1972, 20 years later, they added the signboard, basically a fence going around the roof of advertising. And I found this building fascinating because I discovered that it's actually built like I had to drive around the building, but it's built exactly as the drawing. Nice, cool. Just south of there is a store which I'm calling. For years, I thought it was Chandeliers Furniture, and I realized that they sell chandeliers. Don't know what, but it's a great example of sector with moving roof, the brick beat pylon. Next slide, please. Across the street is the Budget Inn, which was originally called the Bonsoir, and this was designed by a very well-known local Fort Lauderdale architect, Robert. It's interesting when you look at the original drawing, beautifully, it's very elegant, very thin line. The roof line is much thinner. It looks almost like it floats. So obviously, there have been some renovations over the years, but I think the essential form still. Then we have in Wilton Manors, we have the building that was beauty behind local architecture. And this is a wonderful mid-century modern as influenced work. And then Federal Highway is actually the second church, set way back the road. This was done by a very famous, not only the Coral Ridge Presbyterian Church, just the street, and the very well-known Air Force, Colorado. What's interesting about this is that it looks like a typical screen wall from that era. And once you walk the doors, that entire facade rose gold cross. So it really. And then further down is the Bayview building. This is one of the buildings that was also recent. And this is a wonderful example. Two-phase building, an office building, the red building and the white building. And although the porte cochere is no longer there, it's fortunate that the gas station building is. You can see here a hand curving forms, brick grills is. And then we come back down to Gateway Theater by the architect Igor Polovitz. He was much better known for a lot of the work he did in Miami Beach. I believe this was only work here. Although it's been changed a little bit, you can see there were completions of, there was a lot more lighting, power, forms. So, go to the next, please. And this is, I couldn't resist including this. So this is torn down. This used to be at 3001 North Federal Highway, somewhere Coral Ridge. And it was a chain of drive-ins. I don't know if it ice cream, but it was a very creative art. And two more. And although there's no theme those building, I think the one theme is the striving for it as next slide. Because I really go back to what the owner of the convertible said. He wants was so I hope one neighbor. We have other neighbors. I wanted to be able to survey the city. But I do think that before we lose the building, I'd like to see as for these buildings that I'd also like to see the other neighborhoods where there are also great site designation. They're not built. It was building. There may be where the idea or any
About roughly maybe 15 years ago, there was a mid-century group that's in our area here that had a yearly or buy-in kind of conference on that. I don't never followed south.
I don't know. I was here.
It was because they had. I went to a couple of those.
I can find out.
Yeah, I went to a couple. Couple were individual homes. One was business. It's at least probably close to 50.
I think it was a great presentation, Arthur. It was really nice. The only kind of follow-up question I guess I'd pose it back to you would be, are you suggesting that, as the city attorney had mentioned, that we possibly position or nominate some of these structures or all of these structures as being notable, designated? Is that what you're requesting?
That's what I would like to do, as we have the city, many others, mainly older.
Just to be clear for the record, there were a few structures that were located outside of our jurisdiction. We wouldn't have the authority to designate those.
And I
the
mentioned
Wilton Manors and the
I would
Oakland
hope
Park.
Lauderdale. There's basically
We would only be able to designate those within our jurisdiction.
So I would ask a question to Tricia, because Tricia obviously went through spearheading a very comprehensive survey program. Tricia, has there ever been a survey based on style in this case? You know, something that we could categorize, as Arthur has done here in his presentation, that would be put together based on the type of mid-century that we're now talking about? Has anything like that been done?
So within our ordinance, we don't technically have a way to designate like a thematic historic district.
Right.
Our historic district,
what about Sailboat Bend?
it's not thematic, it's geographic. So it has a boundary, and every property within that boundary does. A thematic district would be specific buildings within a geographic boundary, but did not include all of them.
Sure.
And we don't have that language within our ordinance. It is possible to do that with the National Register for a multiple property, but
we do have individual historic site designation.
right, you can do historic landmark or historic site. When there is a structure present, historic landmark designation would be more appropriate, and that does include the entire parcel.
So the only, quick thought that comes to mind, this goes back, I don't know, probably year and a half, maybe longer. is when a lot of the central beach buildings were up in this situation. There was certainly not just from the direct ownership, but similarly from neighbors and just the people that are on the beach, been on the beach for decades. I think we saw, both positions, one of in favor and certainly those adamantly opposed. So my whole thought in saying that is I almost would want to call in some way notice to these owners of what
I think that would happen.
but even beforehand, like even before the idea of designation to gain feedback, because I'll speak to the I'll call it the circular building, the Kinan building. Is that okay? For example, I know recently, and I believe that's out of our jurisdiction. It may not be, maybe on the Oakland
It
Park
is, it's in
boundary. But for example, that just received a huge development multifamily entitlement to build
right
280 units, which was very unique in the way they did it because they incorporated the building. Yeah, I think you'd appreciate it. So I just think even before we get to the point of designation, just the thought of notifying owners of the idea of this meeting, because the likelihood of this getting back to them isn't all that strong, but maybe inviting them into the fold before proceeding.
This is just the beginning.
Right. Okay.
I couldn't agree with.
Yeah, and I think that to Trisha's point, I mean, there is a thematic premise that's accomplished in other parts of the country. Certainly doesn't seem like that couldn't be the case here. But I just think we want to kind of walk slowly and lightly as we sort of venture into the space. But great presentation.
So just to clarify the process, if the board were to make a motion to initiate an application for designation, then it goes to staff. Staff is responsible for preparing that application, come back to the board for its initial hearing, and then it goes to City Commission. As part of our code, within 10 days after you make this motion to initiate a designation, we do have to notify the property owner.
So back the last thing up, 10 days before, just the procedural component of it. 10 days before. Can you just say that one more time?
So if you were to make a motion today,
Tonight, sure.
then within 10 days, I would have to send out a notice to the property owner to let them know that the Historic Preservation Board has asked to initiate a historic designation application on their property.
And then procedurally, like I recall that was changed in the ordinance, whereas before we had standing jurisdiction to make that application, push it forth. That's still the case, or can they then object, in which case it would potentially be withdrawn?
Well, so then it would take time for staff to put together the application, because
Right.
it does require putting together research, writing, and gathering all of the information to then come back to the Historic Board for its first public.
But the owner, I guess my question is, the owner would have no ability to intervene, and then
They would be informed of the date.
okay,
They would provide a notice 30 days in advance of that date.
right.
They can come here. Then at that first public hearing, the board would make a motion in support of the designation application or not, and that information is provided to the City Commission as part of the second.
But I guess to really just pin down my question, the applicant being the owner, and the applicant in that case is the board,
Yeah.
right? But the owner, the direct owner, would have no ability to procedurally stop the application from proceeding at that point.
The only way that they could stop it is if they came here with evidence stating that it doesn't meet the criteria in the code for designation.
Right.
And that if the board believes that evidence and states so on the record, and
Okay.
so that's how they could stop.
That makes sense. Do we as a board sit in a unique position to essentially nominate these buildings or a grouping of them, whereas someone in the public could no longer do that? Because I'm recalling something in the ordinance that changed in the last few years, where once it was fair game for the general public, but that's no longer the case.
That's correct. In
Okay.
472411C, it states that the only way that you can designate a property is by motion of the Historic Preservation Board or by motion of the City Commission, or by a property owner with respect to his or her own property, and or by a simple majority of the owners of a area who are seeking to be designated.
Okay.
And then the last one is by a corporate resolution of a nonprofit corporation that specifically has maintained a historic element to it for the last 5 years.
Understood. So Arthur, that was my point in that if we do it, I almost think there should be a preemptive sort of at least in some way reaching out.
You're almost asking for like a pre-meeting.
Correct.
Instead of
Like a
handing them-
pre-notice.
instead of handing a letter, having a meeting and giving them the letter there and or something.
Yeah, because I think there's a shock value, or sort of like a
Well, we saw the shock value with that meeting.
right, and just trying to take from that the reaction of, I think there's almost a defensive that's put up when that's the case, because immediately I think people go to a development, they're wearing a developer hat at that point, and why are you restricting my rights as a property owner? And I think to avoid that, at the very least, a very well sort of an encapsulating your PowerPoint into letter form almost, and notifying them of the possibility that it's going to come forth.
Tricia, is this?
So it is possible. It's just voluntary. It's not required by the code, but it's voluntary. So if I were to
Sorry,
ask,
on whose part?
as far as sending letters out to these property owners, so if I could just ask for clarification, what you would like Tricia to do essentially is for the properties that are located within the boundaries of the city, you would like her to send out a letter just giving them notice that this is going to be considered as a possible motion to designate. And it's just a letter, and then we would place this on our agenda, not as for the good of the city, but an actual agenda item. And then at that point, you take a motion to approve or deny.
But I think what Richard asked for in the process to send them the letter, but also say, please call us and schedule a meeting. We'd like to talk to you further before. So that way, a lot of
Right.
might be
Softened.
Oh,
An informal warning.
okay. So you would like the letter to include language in it, just basically stating that the property owners are welcome to contact you prior to the meeting to discuss the matter. Is that what you'd like? Yes, contact you outside of the meeting, which
Well, we were
they
saying for
sometimes
them
do. Either way, I just wanted to know for clarification.
yeah.
Well, similar to how we receive, and Tricia,
Parte.
right? We
Right.
receive the ex partes, sort of allowing that runway in this case prior to, because in that point, who knows? Maybe there is this defensiveness that we all sort of felt when the Central Beach Alliance came forth.
Correct.
Maybe they're engaging counsel. Maybe there's something. I'm sensing, based on the reading I got from the feeling from that meeting, was that people appreciate more notice than maybe what the code calls for.
Okay, so
I couldn't agree with Richard more. Very for the people in the audience.
okay, so if I may just try to wrap up what's being requested. So what's being requested is that for the properties that were presented tonight that were within the jurisdiction of the city of Fort Lauderdale, we would place on the agenda, the actual agenda for, would you like it to be the next meeting? Just for consideration. It's just for consideration of a possible motion. It doesn't even have to be a motion. You
Right.
just say, I'm not doing anything.
Correct.
For possible designation of the properties that are within the jurisdiction of the city of Lauderdale.
Call it possible historic site designation. Is that what
Historic
it is?
site, okay. If you'd like historic site or historic landmark, whatever.
Well,
Whatever.
Also, I think it might. First question, I would property owner. If part of the letter it could say this designation, and you can still build on the property. It's just a matter of observing something.
I think the problem with that is that we can't give them legal advice. They have to read the code or seek their own counsel, but we can inform them of the meeting if that's something. It's voluntary, so essentially it's just asking staff to do something. So I can't make her do it, but if she's willing to do it, so essentially what they want you to do is send a voluntary notice to the property owners of the properties that were listed tonight in the presentation that are within the jurisdiction of the city of Fort Lauderdale, letting them know about this item that will be on our agenda. It's a possible motion to start the designation process. They may or may not do it. It's just to inform them so that they're able to obtain counsel, talk about it, whatever they like to appear at the meeting. So is that something you're okay with? It's voluntary, so I'm just asking because it's not in the code, so I'm making sure that she's okay with that. So it wouldn't be the
whole process is that I would given direction from above in order to
correct.
do that, not
I
necessarily
understand.
directly
Yeah.
from the board.
Right, typically. So
How
that's how we typically do it.
But I do think, Richard,
there a way to do this informally without violating sunshine laws?
well, you can't speak to each other, so that would be a violation of the sunshine law, but you could go and you could speak with the, property owners, but
I mean, here's the thing here. If I own a property like that and I get a letter from the city of Fort Lauderdale, logo on letterhead and whatnot, I am going to go ballistic. I'm going to lawyer up my first reaction. They're going to designate a property, paid millions of dollars for, and now I have 3 hearings to change a toilet. I would fight with them now. So, and the best way to piss everyone off would be to go up start about it officially. The way to do it informally. Hey, that's my whole thing. You're gonna piss a lot of people off.
how would you suggest doing it?
I would call up the owners and say, "Hey, we're talking." I wouldn't start off anything from the city hall. I would not do that. We're gonna get bad reaction.
I completely agree with you. It's going to be sort of antagonistic regardless of how we frame it. The problem becomes, I think, at least with sort of pre-noticing the notice at the very least, we've given them more time, because otherwise, to your point, maybe it's just we scrap it all together, because that's going to be very sort of very,
Arthur, if I could make a comment, your vision is excellent. Your idea is honorable. I know there's a sense of urgency with time, because these buildings, as we speak, are being considered for development. So, on your hand, you're trying to get to a point where we could at least get to a table and say, do you guys realize what you have here? Is there some way that we can coordinate a way to preserve the building? Big bridge that we're trying to build is what I've been through with my property and with many of my fellow business people on the beach have been through. It's almost impossible to say to someone who's got a property it can earn millions of dollars. I'll give you a perfect example. I don't know if you were on this board when Jack Ireland's place was challenged. They had the place sold, going to be which it did turn out to be done. But long story short, it got designated, was going up for designation as historical property. This was going to take his entire life's work and change it. His whole legacy, his whole attention to his grandchildren, to his grandchildren's grandchildren, millions and millions of dollars going to go into his family. We're going to go. The idea was going to stay the way it was, what it should be. Well, long story short of it, it didn't happen. But what I'm suggesting is, I think we're getting just a little bit ahead of it. I'm suggesting we keep talking. I'm suggesting we do pull in under the sunshine laws. I don't know how we do this, but I would love to get the ideas from developers and ownership at a table and say, what would it take for you guys to bend in our direction, in the direction of historic preservation? What kind of incentives would work? And then we need the experts who can say, hey, there's federal money, there's county money, there's city money, there's this money and that money. And I don't want to say that money fixes everything, but it is a necessity. There has to be an ethical, economic impact on someone who's going to forfeit millions of dollars to sell their property and build housing, which we need, there's so many arguments and tentacles on this stuff. Someone could say, for the good of the people, we want to keep this Castro building. Someone else could say, well, we're going to build a school there. Someone else could say we're going to build apartments for people who are can't afford, housing that's cheaper for people who is going to be funded by the government. So then all these things go back and forth. I would love to just try to see if we can get people to a table and find out how we can make it happen. What are the possibilities? Because I tend to agree with the idea that if we send a letter out, I'm going to tell you something. The shock value will shoot your good idea in the foot. Got to find a way to introduce this thing soft.
Is there a way to introduce?
I don't know. That's
I
up
don't
for
know.
our city attorney to
We all-
explain to us.
Does anybody know
Here,
the
Well, could we have a city workshop? Is that if they had an open public workshop that just invited? Is there a developers association of guys who build things like the Styles Corporation and get in touch with those guys and coordinate a roundtable discussion?
The owners.
Well, we got to start somewhere. I mean, somebody's going to build for them, and we get those big players that in a roundtable discussion and say, "Listen, we're trying to preserve places, and how do we do it?"
I agree with the idea. We send a letter. Yeah.
I just don't think you have any teeth to something if it doesn't. And I'm not implying we should send it out on letterhead, but I get mail all the time that asks if I'd be interested in attending something, and I typically don't take it very seriously. So I think.
Yeah, but if we're talking about your building, you would.
Yeah, but the reality is, if we're presenting it in a way where like it's sort of jurisdictionally not being serious, then maybe I'm wrong there.
What do you mean by that?
Well, if you're saying, hey, come to this this workshop, we're going to discuss these buildings at large. We're going to discuss all of them. I think that speaks a little less personally than does something that is directly addressed.
Have a separate meeting for each building.
No, I'm not saying a separate meeting for each building. I'm just saying if you're trying to organize this in such a way where we're trying, the goal here is the objective of what you've set forth in your presentation. I don't know how that's accomplished in anything less than a letter. And I agree with everyone here. I think the letter might kind of hit you, and all of a sudden everyone is obtaining counsel going that route. But inevitably that's going to happen. So whether that happens next month, the following month, I mean, if this is something you really want to call forward, then that. I do have one point though. Tricia, Fort Lauderdale doesn't offer or doesn't have anywhere in the city where, let's just say presumably for a moment, and these buildings probably does not apply here, but just curiously, if we wanted to move these structures, if a developer said, you know what, not interested in this is a prime piece of federal highway, I can get X or I can build Y, does the city offer anything where the idea of the building, let's say presumably for a moment, could be moved, theoretically could go to a piece of land that the city owns? I know they do that in other cities often. Do we do that in any way?
It has happened, like with the ship, but it's not necessarily something that it's not something that happens frequently or
Right.
something that
Right. Because I guess the question becomes is it's not even a question. It's a matter of, it's to Tim's point, you've generational wealth that's built on some of this real estate, and I think people are going to fight with every fiber of their
Yeah,
being.
but you have to realize too, these lots are quite deep. So I mean,
Right, no,
there's still a lot of land besides where the building.
No, I follow, but they're usually centered in the middle of these lots, and to do anything,
Makes it difficult.
objective, you've got to, you've got to face the obvious here, which is either demolition or relocation. So,
Well, I think relocation, in my experience, historic, I found it courage. Usually, like in the found
The entirety of all of them speak
right.
the preservation being.
It would be wonderful if we had fun. It's
Well, of
just
course.
that simple. If the building's worth $50 million and you have $51 million, you go in and buy it and it stays the way it was. And that's the
Well,
sad
there is
reality.
funding available. There are certain available.
But the funding doesn't meet not on the.
Well,
It's not
I
at
know.
market value though.
What
I
the
want to
Yeah.
ask Tricia a
do in the
question.
real world.
Tricia a question with the existing historic site. Process to describe what the letter out. Would it
No, probably not in any of the cases because the code has changed.
these were done a while?
They were done previously. So, like Richard was mentioning previously, anyone that lived or worked within the boundary of Lauderdale could submit an application for designation for any property. So sometimes it was that
That's
way.
still true.
No, that's not true. So that's why Sherry outlined what is possible as far as who can initiate or submit an application for designation. Two options from the city specifically are a motion from the Historic Preservation Board or a motion. And in those cases, it has staff initiate the application or take the application forward to the Historic Preservation Board and then the.
Has the Historic Preservation Board in the past ever designated a building or motioned on a building in similar circumstance or in any circumstance at all?
Not to my knowledge here. It hasn't been done since they did the ordinance.
Right, it's a recent update, so before it wasn't something that.
Okay. But in a hypothetical situation, let's say for a moment we decided we all wanted to move forward, we put it forth. Basically, we follow the procedural aspect of notice, everyone gets notified. We then hear on the merits of the staff report what you're going to report, and then we make that determination regardless of appeal or otherwise from the ownership of the buildings, just so I'm clear. It's sort of like we're judge and jury in that case, right? That's what I'm just trying to determine.
So the board is saying, we think that this building or any particular building warrants further
Right.
and warrants preservation. Staff will do the staff
Right.
will say, yes, it meets certain criteria or it doesn't. And then the board has to analyze that application based on the research and do that.
Sure. I can just, and I'm just spitballing, but I can see a situation where it could be appealed on the commission level, and then above that, if it were to get to that, the way we're going about that is in some way self-serving because it doesn't allow. It's almost like you're right. You're almost appealing a case before the case is factually presented.
The designation for any designation application, the Historic Preservation Board is a recommending body.
Sure.
So you're not making the final determination on a historic designation application.
So who
Commission does.
the commission is doing that then? So then we escalate that. That's the part I was missing then. So
You're
we're
providing a recommendation. Either it could be approval, it could be denied.
so we can wrap it the way I described to in which case we're sending it up to the commission. The commission is then making a decision, and basically all the private ownership interest then has to make their case to the commission at that point.
They make it to the board and to the commission.
Right.
But basically, the beginning process is really just a simple motion to have
Right.
staff do the application, and then the staff presents the evidence, not the board. So essentially, this is probably the last time you'll see this. If
Right.
it comes up as far as from anything else, there's not going to be evidence from the board.
But we still voted on it based on the same criterion that staff lays out in every application.
Correct.
Okay. So,
Yeah, but don't forget that when we do these things, when ownership does not have any say at all, in my humble opinion, it gives historic preservation a black eye.
I agree.
When you're standing there and you're saying, yes, you own the place. No, you don't have anything to say about this. We are ultimately going to make this decision. We're going to make a suggestion to our commission. Our commission is going to make a decision, and you will have to follow it. that, then the next person that comes up with this is why we're having this conversation. Why are people going to have shock value if we send them a letter? Because they've heard too many horror stories. And we've seen so many in front of us, people who come here who want to put a door or a window in the house, and they hear too many bad stories. They don't see what we've been developing here over the last couple of years is a kinder, more, how can we work this out? I think the word that this architect uses, one we ought to adopt, it was called hybrid tree. We should have an idea in our minds for hybrid material. So we know that the world is running out of some of the bricks and wood and stuff that we would love to have, but we don't. So we have to have a hybrid. And if it's not what we ultimately would like to have, then let's settle for something that's close, rather than just stand there and say no, because then nobody wins. Everybody goes home pissed off. So
What are you?
I'm proposing that we keep talking about this and keep working it, and we have to find ways to get money into the mix. I'm telling you, without money, you're not going to be able to sell this pack. It's just that simple. I mean, look at what you're discussing. You have beautiful buildings here. I would love to see them all stay the same. The Maikai would never argue with you because they make money with that design.
They're already announced.
Right. And that's a success story. It's also an owner who's participated. But if you go across the street to some place that's got 5 acres and somebody wants to build a community there, especially if it's like a really good community, like one that fits the neighborhood, then if you do push it to the commission, now we're getting into politics and who's funding elections, et cetera, et cetera. It just gets complicated. I honestly don't think. I think our first step is education. I said that last month. And if you want people to go in your direction, they have to want to go in your direction.
One way to do this.
How would you convince? I guess you asked me, how do we do it? How do you convince, Arthur? How do you go to a guy who owns this beautiful property and sell him on keeping it that way? And how do you respond to him when he says, Arthur, I would love to do that, but show me the money. I've worked all my life. I'm 75 years old. I want to retire. I got a chance to make $100 million.
Program in place.
Well, we do have 2 tax incentives. In addition, onto a historic structure, then it basically freezes the tax at the level for at the beginning for a period of 10 years.
And their incentives, there's no question about it. They can't compete with the fair market values that are being thrown at people. It's just hard. So, when this whole thing started, and I'm so not person. I remember Abby having a conversation, and she mentioned to me that it was the Rockefellers or Penn Station, that there was so much funding at the time from rich people that when they wanted to historically preserve something, somebody would make a donation.
That's when they preserved Grand Central.
Yeah, exactly.
And Station was torn down.
There was so much money around
That's
to do
New
that.
York.
No, but these are windfall properties, though.
But we're talking about the same problem.
Yeah, these are hundreds of millions of dollars.
Kind of responsibility.
We could bring it to people's attention.
What I'm thinking, Jim.
Sure.
Wait, to get myself out. Is that not averse. Point. I think the word is. So maybe formally, I know it would be
You can do a motion to put this on the agenda for the next meeting, and
So I was saying that way, as Tim is asking people.
as a
Hollering think
Well,
we
the
as
word
a
is out
board
already.
get our ducks in a row, keep talking about it, so we have something that we can present to people that they will understand, and give it to them in spoonfuls, because the general feeling about what historic preservation does is not very kind to people's development rights.
Right. Well, just think also that word is
Mm-hmm.
so.
What do you mean when you say that, though? I don't follow that. The word is out in terms.
Talking about it tonight.
No, I know, but we're not exactly talking before a huge audience. That's the thing, and I don't know how many people.
The word will get it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
yes and
mean,
no. I mean, I honestly don't think that. I don't think that this board, we were to sit here tonight and say, hey, we want to designate this building on Federal Highway. I think that we would be, the city would be so jammed up with legal jargon, and it would be tabled so quickly because
know,
there's just too much money involved.
But this is.
But even so, then
We
you're gonna put a stop to any future request. It's just
We don't
gonna muck
advance
up the system. Anybody who owns a piece of property on
No,
that,
I won't.
I don't know about that. Money
I mean, I'd be glad.
since discussion, yeah, but I don't think. I personally don't think we should make any moves.
Recently, Wilton Manor went through the deal when they were at their center there. They were going to have, they built those buildings and for restricted individuals and so forth. They went through quite a few heavy discussions and so forth. I don't know the details how they went. You might ask someone who was
discussions at
in their Pride Center.
the Pride Center when they built their new residence.
Yeah. You know,
That's not a historic.
no, but I'm just saying, how did they do it? So I mean, community got fired up, of course. How did they do it that it did explode on them? I don't know. I don't know.
I don't either, but I guess my point is we got to be walking through a landmine. We don't want to step on one and blow up the future. If we're not careful about how we do this and introduce this and talk about this, we could take ourselves further away from where we are right now. That's all I'm saying.
That's what I'm saying.
You know, and I just think further discussion with the
Get
board
in there.
and more members a light might go on in somebody's head and say, hey, why don't we do it this way? I don't have an answer.
I have a question though to exactly the points you're making. Is there something that can fall short of making an official designation while making a recognition that would not really strip away the property rights and have to overcome sort of the removal of the designation? Is there something that could badge it or pledge it or make it so we're recognizing it or the city's recognizing through a resolution or otherwise or putting a plaque out, but stopping short of literally designating it? Is there something that
Another
right? Is there another mechanism?
Well, there's the National Register of Historic that does not have regulation.
So that wouldn't interfere with property right, with the development right, a future development right, if it were to be in the National Register.
Correct. If in the future the building is demolished, the Historic Preservation Board
Okay.
doesn't come along with regulation.
So I think that might be somewhere to at least, because at least when you get the legal analysis of that and potentially the
whole point is to try and keep the building.
but I think the echoing point around the diocese here is we might be in for quite a battle if that's the case. And I guess I have one last question. I know we need to wrap up to if let's say presumably we put this on the agenda, we certified it, we approved it based on staff's report, it goes to commission approves it. Then the applicant has a right to appeal it to the circuit court sitting in an appeal setting, right? Is that what would happen?
Yes, they'd just be a party status, and then.
And if they prevailed, if the plaintiff in that case prevailed, what would happen to the board from having started and initiated the process? Nothing.
You know,
It would certainly cost a lot of money.
I'll make a suggestion. I suggest that we continue to talk about this as a board for the next 2 or 3 meetings with a 30 to 45-minute time limit. So this discussion would carry on. I want to put my 2 cents in on asked about what Tricia and said that there's a national register for, it's not historic preservation, but it is a recognition. That is a step in the direction that you ultimately want. So now you're saying to someone, you've got a beautiful building. We want to hang a ribbon. Just let me finish. And that person, if we are fortunate, will be introduced to the value of historic preservation. Now, that's a little bit different than just going in there, cutting out a big piece of pie, and boom, we're giving them a spoonful and saying, look, you've got a beautiful building. Now you're recognized nationally for it. So perhaps that's a step in the right direction. Maybe you're not going to get what you want. Look what we did with the hotel on the beach. They saved the lobby, they saved the facade, and they still got their rooms done over behind it.
I think you're not equating up, because historic site designation can enable National Register.
No.
I mean, the owner can say, thank you, I really appreciate the designation. The next day.
That's true.
And the National Register is not something outlined within our ordinance. It's not something that.
It's also not something local. We would.
My point isn't that it gives you what you want, it just opens up the door. That's all I'm saying.
But
now you have yourself in the room. I think I'm an example of the Hatfields and McCoy's mentality between historic preservation. When I first came to my first day here, I got a welcome like I didn't belong here, one of the board members. And I stuck it out. I stayed and got to be friendly with you guys, and they respect each other. We had this conversation last time. So all I'm saying is, I'm trying to develop a mechanism that we can get education to people who don't understand the value of historic preservation. But at the same time, I know very well that the dollars have to be there at the end of the day. It's not just money. It's what did these families, why is it historically preserved? It's 50 years old or better. Well, what was that guy doing for 50 years? A guy like me. He was working. What was his intention to do with his wealth when he sold his building? Take care of his family. So these are the challenges that we have. It's a lot more than just passion, the recognition of the structure and saving it. There's a lot to sell here. So that's why I'm suggesting we continue talking. And we won't break the sunshine law when I sit down with guys I know plenty of developers down. I'm going to call one. I won't mention his name, but I'm going to call one next week, and I'm just going to sit down and say, Howie, let me pick your brain. What would you look for, or what do you know about? What have you seen happen in the rest of the country?
You won't break the sunshine law and talk to a developer.
No.
One of us is not with.
Right. So I'm going to talk to him and see if he has any ideas. He might say, well, geez, if we just had this or that or the other thing. I wish I had the answer, because if I did, I wouldn't, I'd be a real happy guy, and we'd see a beautiful buildings like this.
What do we have to do to continue the discussion?
So you would just do a motion now, just have us put this as a discussion item on the next agenda. We can put it in the same place for the good of the city, if you'd like to have it as a discussion, or if you'd like it on the main agenda, we can do that. We can also provide a copy of the agenda to the property owners if that's what you like. We can do that as well. It's up to you. Just let us know what. Correct. We would list the property.
I don't think we're ready for that to list property. I think we're ready to just keep talking amongst each other and put it on our next meeting as for the good of the city, like you did today. Do exactly what you did today.
So if you do the good of the city, then you own it.
That's fine. We're not ready for that.
You can have public.
They can listen. But I don't know. These are my suggestions. I'm not trying to tell us what to do. What we did today, let's have another one of them. Let's see what happens after that.
I'm with Tim. Got it. Education. Very, very important. Take little steps.
Exactly. I don't want to walk in the play, have somebody walk in here and say, so heard you guys are trying to tear everything,
Yeah,
or
but
stop us from building on Federal Highway. Did you hear that they're closing down Federal Highway? They're going to turn it into a museum, and we got to put a stop to this. It's like, that's how
I
crazy it
understand.
is.
That's how.
So do we,
Heat. Whoa. Took off. Tim. Add it.
well, I agree with everything here that although we followed the process, perhaps your step might have been very soft.
Well, the Central Beach survey was just, it wasn't initiating.
No,
At the
it was initiating.
discussion.
Is there a motion? I mean, we can talk and talk, but I mean,
It would be the motion just to put this as a discussion item on the next agenda for
For an
the
agenda.
good of the city.
I'll make the motion, to put it on the next agenda in the same,
With the same title.
with the same title.
well, actually, could we change it from south of Oakland Park to like North Federal Highway?
That would be fine in the motion if that's more suitable.
I second it.
Roll call.
Carney? Mr. Carney?
Yes.
Mr. Parker?
Yes.
Mr. Rosa? Mr. Chavon?
Yes.
Thank you, everyone.
Motion to adjourn.
Spirited discussion.
Second.
I think we should be prepared next. So how will this appear in the agenda?
Just like it is now under the good of the city, the only thing that I would suggest is to just narrow the discussion to the properties that are located within the city of Fort Lauderdale. Just
Okay. And I would request that maybe the board members who aren't here today give this presentation very brief.
What days in what Labor Day is next month? What day is meeting on?
No, it's,
When?
it's Wednesday, September 1st.
Okay.
So it is a little bit different.
September
Thanks for the
1st?
reminder. Yeah. It's Wednesday, September 1st.
So do we have anything else? So you're moving to adjourn?
He didn't adjourn yet, so he's
I have a
tested.
move to adjourn.
They moved
Is there a
already.
Second, we are adjourned at 7:34.
Thank you.